Welcome to another episode of the No Ego Podcast. As promised, I'm returning back to your letters. Want to take your situations, your questions, and answer not only how to apply reality-based leadership philosophy to your situations, but how to do that in a way that's relevant to the times today. So I'm not the only expert out there. I have tons of very cool resources, and I'm bringing in those resources to help me answer your questions. So if you haven't submitted your question or situation, hit the link below. We want to hear from you what you want covered on the podcast. Today, we're going to talk a few things legal. So I brought in my best legal resource, Pam Bourne, employment attorney extraordinaire, and she is my first call for whenever my leaders, my directors need something in terms of how do we do this well? How do we manage all the risk in a situation and do right by our community, our employees, and our company? And that's what I love about her, is she really is a holistic thinker. So glad to have you, Pam.
Thank you. I talk about what an ego after that introduction. Thank you so much.
Well, I didn't even get into like great friends, killer support, mother of three boys. Like, some of you might be wondering, like, what in the heck are they doing in the same room? Good for asking. Wear your mask. Stay home. Stay safe. Pam and I actually are bubble partners.
We are.
Early on, Pam's great at risk mitigation. That's part of your job. Early on, we got on the phone, we're like scheming. I'm in Mexico. I'm like, how do we do this? And then how do we merge our bubbles? And
do it safely and keep ourselves safe.
Figure out, your boys are so special to me, and figure out how we can have some social life. So Pam is in the bubble. I came home from Mexico, did my quarantine, got indoctrinated into the bigger bubble. And,
Thank goodness.
So a little bit about yourself and your backgrounds before we get into some of the letters, because you really are my first call. Like, I'm like,
appreciate that.
Pam, and you always give me such good perspective. You're able to just boil things down like to the essence of, let's focus on this first. And I think that's what I love about you. But what's your incredible background?
Well, I'm an attorney at Woods and Aiken, which is here in Omaha. We also have offices in Denver, DC, and Lincoln.
Which is cool, because between DC and Lincoln, but you guys also practice in multiple states. I've referred you guys over and over and over again.
We appreciate that. I focus exclusively on labor and employment law, and we represent management. And my practice is kind of unique in the sense that I don't spend a lot of time in litigation. I spend a lot of time on proactive advice with employers.
I love it.
So how can we have real conversations about what we can do to prevent problems from arising before they happen?
Which is how we connected, because I am so used to going on like SHRM events, and we have an incredible SHRM chapter, Sarah Schultz and her team here in Omaha, HRAM, HR, I think of the Midlands or something.
Association of the Midlands.
Association of the Midlands. I'm not good at acronyms. Anyway, they put me on the docket with a lawyer, and the number one thing I was hearing at that time is, yes, we'd love to do this, but we can't because we have a union, and we can't because we would be grieved, and our legal team doesn't support us, and how do you balance what's legal and what is good leadership? And so I was a little bit, I think, biased towards most legal professionals telling us no and taking the safe side.
Right.
So when Pam got up and spoke, it was like we were sisters separated at birth. She is like, oh, that's totally within your legal right. And here's how you do that without, erring clear on the side of some illegal action. That's really what I got so excited about when I first heard you speak, is you are proactive and you tell people how to run good HR and leadership practices so that if something does come up, people are willing to give grace on each side. Like, employees are like, for the most part, you do well by us. Right. I'll come early and just try and work this out. But
right. And I would say this, I think that what we're always trying to look is how can we put ourselves in the best possible position if risk does arise.
Yeah.
If we have a discrimination charge, if we have a lawsuit, how can we put ourselves in the best position so we're making good decisions? But many times it's easy to say no. Many times it's easy to say,
It is the
"You can't do
easiest to
that.
say no.
Can't do that."
And the
Not
ego
gonna happen.
loves the word no because it keeps us safe. And then we're victims. We only focus on why we can't because
Right.
it's not safe instead of how we could. And that's really key that you bring to the table. It's like, I'm not going to tell you why you can't. Tell me what you want to do and I'll tell you how you could, which is good consulting, I think.
That's the perfect match, is what do you want to happen, and let's figure out a strategy to get there with the least risk possible. And many times anything's possible. People will say, well, we were told we were never able to do that, or we can't do that. Typically you can find a way to do it. And sometimes it's a matter of what your risk assessment is.
Yeah.
It's kind of like speeding. Some people are probably a 75 mile an hour. They like to go, 68, 69, well below. Others of us are somewhere close to 82. We like a little risk. We are okay with it. But what I find is that most organizations realize that if you want to hear no all the time, you've got zero risk.
Yeah.
And most have said, hey, we operate in a world where we've got employees and we've got people and we need them. We
Yeah.
need them in our work. So what can we do to make certain things happen? And sometimes that involves a little bit of risk.
And getting out of that
And getting it
polarity,
done, right.
because a lot of people are like, are you going to open it wide up? Or, even with COVID today, are you bringing everybody back? Or are you keeping everybody home? It's like, it's not about the no risk, it's about risk reduction or risk management. I think it's so important too, because I meet people who believe this is how good HR is done, or this is what good leaders do. And they have forgotten the situational concept. What I may do in HR for one company could be totally different from another company. I've got to ask the company, what's your risk profile? And, with some risk usually comes some rewards. Like, what are you comfortable with, and where can we take it? Which I think most people just think there's a good way to do things. It's a very shallow opinion.
Well, and it also surprises me too is how much communication can impact your risk level. In other words, when you have people who can leave their ego at home and have good, solid, authentic conversations
That's so
with folks,
key.
there may be some risk involved, but the likelihood of that ever being high risk, because you're being authentic, you're having
Yeah.
good conversations, can really eliminate that.
Even just getting a leader to admit, like, I was wrong, or we thought that would work, and a week later it doesn't,
Right.
or, do you have any insight? Like, why is that so tricky? Or maybe a more fair question is like, when you do screw up, like, what do you tell people? Like,
Well, I think what we have to realize is we're all human,
Yeah.
and we're going to make errors. And so we lose credibility with employees when we act like we're not.
yeah,
When we don't acknowledge our errors, when we're not authentic about them.
which is counterintuitive because the ego thinks the leader should know, and that it's like a weakness if I show you there was something I didn't know.
Right.
But that's so archaic, like in a team environment. It's like you're going to trust somebody who actually will let you know when they know and when they don't know.
Right, and I think what's important is we send a message to folks we're listening. We may have thought we had it right, but once we heard from you, once we saw your perspective, to raise the flag and say, we made a mistake. We never intended it to come like this. The communication was wrong.
That's so
How we
important.
presented it was wrong. But to learn from that is so important. And, I think part of the problem that we see is we have people in workplaces who do awesome on a technical basis.
Yeah.
They're great at their job. And so what do we do to reward them? We put 20, 40, 100 employees underneath them.
Yeah.
Like, if you're good at building this, then you must be good at managing people. And the fact of the matter is, two separate worlds.
Completely separate worlds. So we lose twice. We lose the technician we had because we promoted them, so they can't do their work, and then we lose a million times when they have zero skills to lead people.
And that's the problem, is that because we haven't given them the tools of just as much as we've done on training on new development and new products, the tools on how do you interact with people, how to talk with people, how to communicate, how to tell people when they aren't meeting your expectations, how to have good conversations, and most importantly, how to apologize when you're wrong.
Yeah.
When you've reached the wrong determination, when you've told someone you thought they did something and you were wrong.
These
How
are
to-
like
how to
simple life
preserve your
skills.
credibility.
Yeah.
Right.
These are life skills. And I have found some gaps I didn't realize in the workplace. So as COVID hit and as discussions were really amplified on racial equity and structural racism, and I have found that people didn't even have the basic communication skills, the making amends skills, the managing their own anxiety skills. I found a gap that I didn't realize was there. But if you have those basic skills, a lot more of this is possible. It's like the margin for error with people that have, whether it's EQ or people give them more grace because they know that they're doing some of their own self-regulating, which worries me because in downtimes, the first budget to get cut is your training and development budget. I mean, it's the first thing to go. And we're in the most difficult times where you need to be really good at communicating and really good at self-reflection and really good at leadership. And at the very time we're challenged, we drop out the kind of one part of the budget that could really help us develop our leaders.
I don't think you could have said it better. And here's why. So many of the topics that we're dealing with today in workplaces, our leaders don't know how to have good conversations
They
about
do not.
them. So when you talk about like the Black Lives Matters movement, when you have people who will say,
Yeah, they do dumb stuff. They're like, well, don't all lives matter? And I'm like, hopefully someday. Right now we have a group that's a little,
We have folks that are hurting in workplaces.
Yeah,
and I've also heard people say, discrimination doesn't exist here. I'm glad in Nebraska discrimination, or wherever you're at, discrimination doesn't exist.
I used to say that. I'm like, you guys, you don't understand. I was raised in a community where we didn't really have racism. And somebody goes, well, that sounds pretty easy because you also don't have anyone who's black. I'm like,
Right. True.
got
it.
Yeah.
And
all the dumb stuff we do.
that's part of the
But people
problem,
say
is
that,
making
especially
moves.
here in the Midwest, like, we're not really racist. I'm like, everyone's a racist.
Well, and I think it's twofold, the issue. One is having a good understanding of being open-minded. There's a lot of folks out there that are saying, I'm glad we don't have these problems. And first of it is, maybe you do.
Yeah.
I mean, when I'm seeing progressive HR teams right now, they're really digging into their statistics, finding out, hey, we hope we don't discriminate against people.
But let's look at what the
reality
data
is,
shows.
We need to start looking at the data, and we need to start analyzing more, and we need to be open-minded, and better yet, we need to challenge ourselves. So I've seen some company leaders come out and say, we hope discrimination doesn't exist here, but we're smart enough to know that discrimination is everywhere.
It's everywhere.
And so really the issue is, what can we do to impact the workplace to really support this movement and move the needle on discrimination?
Yeah. It starts by just saying yes. If that's a concern raised by anywhere in the nation or the world, let's listen to the concern and just say, yeah, let's check it out for ourselves and see what can happen. A lot of people, and I don't get political on the podcast, but they get so scared when people talk about things like defund the police. And I always say, we already have in the suburbs defunded the police. We took the money that we'd put in prosecution and put it into parks and, baseball and soccer teams. But in a way, what you're asking organizations to do is a bit of defund the police. Like, don't pay so much legal fee on the back end fighting claim after claim after claim. Put it in the front end where you can really help people not have to go through the trauma of being unfairly discriminated against at work and performance management. Or we're going to get to some of your best tips. I'm excited for that.
And I think that's exactly right, Sai. We're saying it's huge to be proactive in this area. And to think that you don't have problems, if
It's
you don't
so
think you have
naive.
problems, you're not looking.
If you don't think I love that. If you don't think you have problems, you're not looking. And you also have to realize that is a bit of an aggression to people who have been living the problems. Right?
Absolutely.
So, like, some people who are like, I'm so surprised that in 2020 we still have these issues. The people who are of color are sitting next to us going, okay, let me catch my breath a moment. That's worse that you are so surprised, because how out of touch have you been from what I've been bringing to you and telling you? And so it's so interesting.
Don't you think it starts at such a young age of, we don't really talk about the skin color, and we don't talk about differences based on skin.
Yeah.
So
And we
don't
even
have
say
these
we don't see
conversations.
color. We even say we don't see color, which is a lie.
And we don't discriminate. And so,
Yeah.
I will tell you, I think one of the things you can do to challenge yourself is have a sit-down conversation with your friends, your black friends. Have a conversation with them of, we've never had a discussion about race discrimination. Is it as bad as what you're seeing?
What's it like for you?
What's it like?
Yeah.
What's happening to you? I sat down with several of my friends and I had this conversation.
Which I love. And part of the reason I love you is you actually have Black friends. Now, some of you got to figure out, like, if you don't just know people of color at work, like, you actually have dinner with them in your home. I mean, those are friends, not just, and so what I love about that is you've got people who are just in your immediate circle, treasured friends who happen to be people of color. But you sat down with them.
I will fall on my own sword on this side because I never had conversations with people about discrimination before this movement. I never did.
And which is funny because you're in the business as a lawyer.
I'm in the business and, I see it. I knew that discrimination existed. But I never had direct conversations. And I had conversations with folks about what have your experiences been? Is it as bad as what we're seeing? How are you doing? And what I heard is, I'm hurting. It's worse than what you can imagine. And let me tell you about numerous of the examples that we've experienced, including examples in workplaces. And
what are some of the typical ones? It does. First of all, did you just call friends up and go, hey,
yes,
I want to learn more. Will you have this conversation with me?
What I did was I called them up and said, I'd love to have lunch. And I know we're under COVID, so we can do it socially distanced. But I'm concerned about you. And I know there's a lot going on right now with the Black Lives Movement.
I love that.
I'd love to get your perspective. And my head was spinning after I talked to folks because I never knew it was so bad. I never knew. Many of them had stories from their own families of experience, from school to athletics to workplaces, to comments that people made, things that people said, ways that people were made to feel in workplaces by decisions that were made. And it really opened my eyes. And I went to it and said, we've got to be able to do more. And I got to tell you, I think if you really want to talk about supporting this movement and really moving the needle, it's having conversations with folks. If you have employees in your workplace, if you have a group of Black employees that you can sit down with and say, let's talk. We're hurting. We know you're hurting. We'd like to hear about what we can do better to help support you. What are things that you've seen here? What can we do?
Besides, because we do affinity groups where we put people together, but I just don't think those are great, don't get me wrong, but that doesn't drive the conversation as far as I want to hold space to understand what this has been like for you, which is a basic thing in marital therapy when we bring couples together, because couples want to talk about what it's been like for them, but usually the other person is like, well, then let me tell you what it's been like for me. And that's not the role to take. The role to take is I want to be fully present to understand what it's been like for you without adding, it's not about me, without adding anything onto it. And that's why I see one place communication is going awry is people come together to do listening and they end up doing schooling. They end up schooling you know why that is because we have tried to do that in the past and no one appreciates. It's that don't have these conversations. I just dropped all my papers. Don't have all these conversations if you can't sit and be present and listen. So that's the key is you were listening, and the part of the problem in these organizations is just the lack of deep listening.
Well, and it's kind of like the Me Too movement with sexual harassment. We recommend it. Do harassment training. Have conversations. Make it part of your group conversations. It can't be sterile training. Let's have some authentic conversations with employees about harassment in the workplace. And you'd hear people say, well, if we have these conversations, we might have more harassment claims.
Wow. Right. If we have these conversations, we might have more harassment claims. That though would be worrying about the wrong number.
That's the wrong number. Most of us would be saying, if we have them and they're out there, we want to know about it. Let's talk about it.
But the ego can get into that type of thinking. It's like, if we can leave this ambiguous, if we can leave this unnamed, then we somehow will be better on the, great places to work marker or something. But that's not true. I hear that so often. That's why that just piqued me. I'm like, they're like, well, won't that increase the number of claims we have? And they're also assuming that it's going to go right to claim. What if it just increased the number of healing incidences we had? Or what if it increased the pace of change in our organization?
Or made us a better employer of choice. Made more people want to come work with us because we have a healthy work environment. And people are outside talking about the things that we've done to address problems that are happening in society. head on.
See, that's the counterintuitive stuff. That's dropping the armor, as Brene Brown talks about. That's the vulnerability as an organization. What if, when I searched Glassdoor, I wasn't looking for, how many claims they had, but what the response was when they found out that they had harassment going on? Like, what if we put more measure? And I see this too as a marriage counselor. It's like, well, that person, they split or they're having problems. It's not whether couples have problems. They all have problems. It's what are they doing about them? And it's almost like, oh, I hear they're in counseling. Like that should be worth 100 points.
Right.
Like that should be worth 100 points. Oh, they divorced is not, that's almost value higher that somebody got out. And instead of stayed in and figured it out.
Working through it and finding out what we can do.
It's so counterintuitive. It's so beyond our ego. So what were some of the experiences when you were talking to your friends that they were able to share with you? And I want one caveat, because I'm getting schooled on this. I'm learning, you guys. Asking informed consent, will you share with me, doesn't put the burden on somebody to teach you. You have Google. So if you don't go to someone, an indigenous person or a person of color and say, so what is all the hubbub about Black Lives Matter? These are not the conversations we're talking about. Google that.
Right.
We're talking about my heart, mind open to you. What's this been like for you? I care about you. So what were some of the typical ones that kind of blew your mind or were so obvious you were surprised you didn't know about it? Were there...
It was interesting to me that it was in all facets of life. So it wasn't just workplace stories. It was sports. It was church. It was friends. Friends saying, for example, a family friend saying, our kids could never, we would never allow our son to date your daughter. We love your family, but, we would assume that he would probably find someone who was white. Things like you're just I can't believe you say these things. And I can't believe people say these things. So it came from folks that were friends, in friends group, in church, in school, in the workplace, different examples throughout.
And it's it may seem I think what we try and do if we don't experience it is we hear one, time somebody made a comment or it happened, and it's easy to discount them. That's what the problem with microaggressions, although those sound kind of bigger than micro. It's easy to discount it because if you get one mosquito bite, you just deal with it. But if you can imagine walking through every facet of your life, getting a mosquito bite from 100 times a day, at some point, you're going to lose kind of your sanity. And not that these folks are, it's just, it's amazing how irritating it could be.
I think you're right when you say the microaggressions, because it's you tend to excuse things. Oh, that could have been a misunderstanding.
It could be explained.
Oh, I'm sure that's not what they meant. I'm sure they had better intent. People say the wrong things. Example after example.
Example after example.
And so when people say to me, discrimination doesn't exist, I've said, if you're not seeing it, if you're not looking, you're not seeing it. And you got to open your ears and start having conversations with people. And I think it's a good example or a good practice to have in the workplace of having these conversations with your employees of calling some people in, finding out what their experiences have been. We won't know if there's problems until people come to us.
Yeah.
And many times folks will leave the organization before they come to us and bring us a problem.
Well, they definitely will, because I think they've lost faith in us. I get this question a lot, so I want to hit on this. People are like, how do I host these group discussions? How do I hold space? I hear a lot people saying, cite any advice, I've got to go back to work, I want to go back to work and host some discussions. And they tend to think about let's have a big group discussion and get it all out. And I think that is the messiest way to do this thing, least private and probably least respectful, because the people who do have the courage to just speak up with that emotion are going to get into kind of preaching into, it's going to get activated. I want people to have those discussions, but I want to highlight what you said about get curious one-on-one first. Get curious from a standpoint of how can I improve my relationship with you? And from that, how can we improve the organizational experience for you? But I think we've got to do such personal stuff first, and we need to do it quickly. We can't have this thing last for years. But
and I think you got to feel comfortable having these conversations. And if you aren't comfortable having these conversations, get some training yourself.
Yeah.
get comfortable with having some tough conversations with folks and just basically listening to what they have.
Yeah, it's not tough if you shut up.
Right. If you just listen. And I think also is really being respectful of other folks. Hey, I'd like to do a small group. I'd like to get some folks in and get your perspective. I want to make sure you're comfortable with this. Here's what I have planned. Really making sure that there's buy-in from all of them, that it's a forum, that they feel comfortable coming forward and being direct and honest with their concerns, because that's difficult in workplaces.
It's tough. And if you don't know what to do,
yeah,
stop trying to figure it out. Ask the people that you want to share. Like, ask them what would help them.
What can we do to move the needle in our workplace? What can we do to support you? What are things that you're seeing? What are things that you're frustrated about? What are your things that we can do better? It's interesting how many folks will just say, provide some training in workplaces to help others understand what discrimination looks like.
It gets so simple.
Simple messages.
Nobody's coming through asking, I think, for their fair share. Like, they're just saying, well, gosh, it'd really be nice if you did X, Y, and Z. And that's where I think people get into inaction, because they don't know what huge thing to do, and they don't know how to do it perfectly to please everybody. And that is, again, fodder for the ego. They're like, well, there's not one silver bullet, so I'll step back and just kind of wait till I learn more. But I didn't realize we'll get this deep into this conversation, but I'm also glad, because obviously I'm not a person of color, you're not a person of color.
Right.
I think we who are white and female especially need to be having these conversations ourselves, so that we have it as a topic that we insist in our friendship group we won't ignore anymore. Like, I almost think it's like more holding people accountable. It's like, you know what? Before we talk about, how the kids are doing, there's something on my heart. And it's like, what's happening in this nation with people of color, and what can we do? Like, I don't want to have a friendship where we pretend that there's not this huge elephant in the room. Like,
absolutely.
And so it's almost like holding people accountable. Like, what are you doing? What are you, talking to your kids about? Like, what are you supporting in your community? I really think it's, in inner circles, it's our having the conversation, but it's holding people accountable to say, this will hurt a relationship if I know this very important part of what's happening in the world that you're not attending to. I can't control you. I don't want to judge you. But It's like, I just want to know. And whatever you're doing is fine. We don't have to be at the same place. Like, you may be working to gain awareness, or
you may be having conversations with your kids.
Yeah.
You may be focusing, something outside of the workplace. You may be, there's a lot of different things you can do. And the one thing that I've learned through this is, if you really want to be an ally, it's not what you did. Mm-mm. It's not, well, I had a group, I'm an ally. It's not, I went and talked to someone, I'm an ally. It's, what are you doing in the future? What are you doing every day? Being part of an ally, if calling yourself an ally in this whole process, it can't be based on what you've done. It's what you're doing. And that's an active tense.
It's really active. And it's so amazing to me, because this isn't, well, and I think, first of all, I think everybody's biggest fear is, or let me back up. I think that many of our biggest fear is this will be like a trendy Instagram thing, and it won't make its way into policy, and it won't make its way into like change. Because I think a lot of people feel good where they're like, oh, I posted this on my Instagram, and it's like, thank you for doing that. Awesome, good job. We can't, you can't take whatever people do and then negate it because it wasn't enough. So you gotta love people. Awesome, good job. And now let's talk about what's next, because it's active. And I believe you can't even like really name yourself an ally. That's like a title you earn, and somebody else experiences you in the moment, active as an ally. And it's not about what you did yesterday. It is about what you're going to do today. And sometimes that is screwing up, realizing another way that I'm a racist, and working to make amends and gain insight. Like, that could be a good day, just having a new insight. It's so important.
Absolutely.
I've got a great question that came in, which is funny because I didn't realize we were going to get into a whole anti-racist discussion. And while I'm there, a couple of things I want to make sure you guys know about. If you have not, and I've said this probably before, I'm a broken record. If you guys haven't listened to, I think it's 5 episodes called Seeing White. If you are white, listen to the episode, the podcast Seeing White. There's 5 episodes. Just Google it. You'll find it. It is a mind-blowing, more factual history of how we got to where we are today and what our real status of what our real state of affairs is. But anyway, I got this great question. So this is from Kelsey, and she doesn't say where she's from. And so I want to put this out to you. Okay. So part of the podcast is taking questions and getting different opinions on these questions. So this is your legal and Midwesterner, raised on the farm, white girl perspective. So this person says, I'm allowing myself, in quotations or parentheses, as you advise, to be changed by what is happening in our world today, or at least doing my best. Love that.
Love that.
Every day I'm learning about my own bias and my own racism. I feel like I can work to change me and grow out of my shortcomings. Yay. It feels like I have a lot of control and can have direct impact by changing me personally, and I'm willing to go the long haul on this. So that fits right in. This person's so looking at themselves. I'm also a leader in an organization that promotes surface diversity, enjoys dabbling with inclusivity, and does the usual programs, initiatives, metrics in regards to hiring and promotions and affinity groups, for example. With my increased knowledge in regards to racism and structural racism, she's getting very educated, you can tell. I have come to view these efforts as such ridiculous baby steps, like complying, not committing, in response to the massive work ahead. And I am realizing that I may not be able to quickly impact the policies or general operations from my position as a mid-manager. And yet, I'm not willing to just admit defeat and be a victim of my circumstances. Any ideas for ways I can create my own climate? I talk a lot about, don't worry about the culture, worry about the climate. Any ways I can create my own climate of doing better in spite of the culture. I'm willing to step up where I can, but not sure where to start or any quick fixes. Thanks for your help. You always give me actionable items, and right now I'm only getting dialogue and philosophical ideas. So I thought you'd be the perfect person. Like, is there low-hanging fruit? Are there first moves? Are there like things I can do even though I'm not the boss of the boss? What do you say to her?
Well, at first I think that's a great question, and way to open up and be like, hey, I've got some I need to be vulnerable here. I got some areas of improvement. Kudos to her. I think part of it starts with educating yourself. You mentioned your podcast or the podcast.
Yeah, that podcast.
Yes. I mean, I think part of this is there's Barnes and Noble has a whole section. There's other bookstores that have whole sections on racial disparities in America.
Yeah, like the entire top of New York bestselling Times list, at least a couple of weeks ago, the entire, all 20 slots were books that have to do with either structural racism or people's personal experience or,
I think starting there is such a great spot of educating yourself. Yes. And really starting with just educating yourself, getting more knowledge is power in this area and understanding it. And that empowers what makes change. And so to really educate yourself. So number one, you can identify racial disparities. You can identify them. You can put yourself in a position to be a voice for folks.
Yeah,
is
or at
also
least you
huge.
know what you don't know.
Right.
But that being a voice for people, it's like if you've got power or privilege, like use it to represent other people.
Absolutely.
Ultimately, hand them the microphone. Just go, oh, it was given to me. Here, this is meant for you.
Right. And I think what's interesting is when you find out with, reading some of these books and podcasts and educating yourself, you come up with some great ideas of things that you can do. Passing that power on, being a voice, advocating for others, speaking up, speaking out when we see things that are inappropriate, that are wrong, that make people vulnerable.
Even having these one-on-one conversations or these small group meetings we talked about.
Absolutely.
Really fit in with this.
And really talking with folks about what can you do? I mean, if you're wanting to move the needle and you're wanting to make a difference yourself, you're either going to see things and start voicing your opinion, or you're going to start having conversations with folks of, I want to help. What can I do to help? What can I do? And what you're going to find is there's a lot of opportunities out there for you. I will give you an example. One of them in the workplaces is we deal with folks that have felony convictions. And we know that Hispanic men and African American men are convicted at a higher rate than non-minorities.
Yeah.
And so many times workplaces have rules that say, if you have a conviction of, and it's related to X, Y, and Z, it may bar you from employment. Sometimes we have to challenge ourselves of, for example, why do we have these things?
Yeah.
Why does
Who are
a
we really
conviction that someone
protecting?
had 15 years ago an indicator of how they're going to perform today on the job?
Can you imagine if the rest of us that didn't have the conviction, but probably did some,
Didn't get caught, but
Yeah.
might have, I mean, it's
if we were held to who we were 15 years ago, oh my God, none of us would have jobs.
That's exactly true.
Maybe
well,
I wasn't like a felon or anything.
you like to have fun. We
like
like to have fun. But the problem is many times we put these parameters in the workplaces because we think it's the best practice to keep our work safe. And challenging ourselves in really understanding why we do certain things, asking questions. It's a very neutral rule many workplaces have. If you've been convicted within so many years, you can't work here. But why is that? What's the correlation?
So I think this, because I think she's asking, like, how do you even bring it down? Like, if you're not HR,
Right.
And this is where I think it gets really sophisticated, folks. You would challenge, why is it a prerequisite? Why is 4 years of, how many of you have a job opening and you go to HR and you challenge us, like, why does it have to be a college degree? And why can't this also say similar experience? Because we're cutting people out of your pool of talent that you can choose from. Can this really, do they have to be in Omaha? Can they, work remote? Does it have to be full-time? Because you're thinking, I have a candidate that wants 3/4 time. We feel confident challenging HR on what's required in our jobs. It doesn't need an HR policy change. What if we went and if we had jobs that it really makes no difference what somebody's background is? What if we just challenge as hard for that as we do for easing, must have worked in the field, for 10 years rather than 2 years because it's a new job. So I'm just trying to take I love what you're saying is like, let's question what we took as assumptions probably 20 years ago. And let's take new realities, but how do we could we show up differently? I personally, if I were a hiring manager, I would ask my HR that.
I think it's very fair.
Yeah.
And I think what it comes down to is, there's a lot of different things you can do. But I've spent a lot of time in workplaces, so I'm probably focused a lot in managing workplaces.
I want you to focus on managing workplaces, because this was in her role as a mid-manager. There's got to be some ways some things that are already being measured that I think low-hanging fruit, and you taught me this, is like, one low-hanging fruit is to look at some of the metrics you already have and just go check yourself. It's like a reality check. And I'd love for you to talk about those, because I talked to you one night as a friend. We were talking about this in our conversation. The very next day, I had somebody that were kind of like, I think we're pretty good here. And I would have said, I've known you guys for a long time. I think you're pretty good. And you had asked one of your clients, just go back and check your performance management system, verbals, writtens, I don't know, terminations, and just do a different split by the demographic of race. Like we split by tenure, we split by gender, we do all these splits, but there's this one split a lot of people are afraid of in the engagement data. What if you split by race? People are like, well, I don't think that's legal. Well, yeah, actually it will really help you stay legal. So I thought that was revolutionary, because even if I'm not HR, I can go back and look at my data.
I think progressive HR teams aren't waiting for complaints and concerns. They're looking and saying, let's reflect on what we do. Let's reflect on every aspect. Let's reflect on our hiring, where we're posting, where we're recruiting. Let's talk about our hiring practices, how we're screening. Let's talk about, once we get people on board, what are we doing to help promote them? Why does our C-suite look like it's all white folks?
Yeah.
Why aren't we having more minority applicants through the promotion process? Why are certain disciplinary rules only being affected by Black employees? And really looking at those.
How's our dress code?
Dress code policy.
Bizarrely slanted towards, like, it really matters if,
Right.
I mean, the most obvious one I heard about was an employer who just was like, you cannot have your hair this way, you can't have your hair that way. And as a joke, some of her Black employees gave her, and I don't know the book, I guess it was a popular book about a little girl's hair. She's Black, the little girl is Black, and her hair, I guess, is like out of control. And as a joke, they gave that manager, but not a joke, right?
Right.
This thing on, just crazy hair. And people still, when we read their dress codes, they're from 20 years ago.
Right.
That you have to have, some people have to have their hair cut like above their collar. It's not military. Like I've even seen it.
Right. And really reflecting upon the different areas of your whole workplace.
Yeah.
Especially where you can make a change. I mean, that's where you bring the most, that's where you can move the needle the most, because based on your experiences, how that may impact people and how the rules maybe aren't applicable evenly. They're just, they're applied
So we may have
differently.
decent rules, but we don't apply them the same because we all play into our own bias.
Well, and I think many times when you think of racial discrimination, you think of racial epithets, you think of, what I would call extreme or overt discrimination. And really,
the ego does that a lot, black or white polarity. It's like, well, is it this extreme? And it's like, that's all the work of the ego. But if you're working with all of your consciousness, like at a higher level of consciousness, you have room for more complex situations, which are more subtle.
Right. And what we're looking at is really those neutral workplace rules that have a disparate impact on races. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's just how people, behave in the workplace. It's not even a rule. Maybe I have a team of folks and I'm not giving credit to Black employees for ideas that they had. I'm not bringing them to the table. I'm not endorsing them among the leadership team. I'm not selling them as much as I'm selling folks that look like me.
Not sponsoring.
I'm not sponsoring folks. I'm not pushing them. I'm not giving them the pull that they deserve because they've earned it. Mm-hmm. And so I think part of that is that self-reflection.
Yeah. No, I don't want to interrupt. I just even check yourself. Where are you flexible with things you understand versus things you don't understand? Where are you flexible? Because I think that's where I see a lot of bias come up. It's like, well, she has 2 kids and I have 2 kids and I really know what that's like when you run into a bind with your babysitter. So I let her have, a start time at 10, just, for the next couple of weeks. Well, what about the person standing in front of you? This isn't about people of color, but like who doesn't have kids, who their cat got sick.
Or they're taking care of their parent or whatever other life.
Or they just needed time from 8 to 10 for no reason they're revealing to you, but they asked for it appropriately. They asked for it passionately. And we're like, well, since I can't understand it, it doesn't meet my logic, so I won't grant it. I mean, I just think there's...
Absolutely. And that's human nature, I think, too.
I think it is.
It's like my emotions. I understand the mother with kids and working, and I want to be flexible. But I don't always understand everyone else's situation. But the problem is that consistency is the cornerstone of fairness. And when you apply rules to people inconsistently, they immediately see it as what it is. It's a form of unfairness. And that's where people go, well, is it because of my race, my sex, my age, my national origin? And so as an HR manager, we have to strive and we have to really focus on, you have rules and you have to manage the workplace, but you also have to find a balance for people.
You do.
You got to have some flexibility with what's going on out there, but you got to make sure that you're applying that consistently. And the things that happen is, I like you, so I'm not going to reprimand you for this.
Yeah.
But someone else that I'm not so much, that does the exact same behavior. And it's like, you know what? I'm going to dock your pay, or I'm not going to put you up for the promotion. Some of those things you really got to reflect on better as leaders of organizations.
And I think you can do that whether HR is helping you do that or not.
Absolutely.
You can just reflect on your own consistent piece and then really notice what's like revealed to you. And so I hear her asking, like, even if the organization's going to move at a snail's pace, like, what can you do? I have this whole theory that you don't have to be a victim of what the culture is or wait until the culture changes. That true culture change happens when a great leader takes, translates the research and accepts reality and moves into creating a great climate. And then we get a lot of climates. We just have to knit those together and bam, that's a culture. I personally don't want to wait until we figure this thing out from the top down.
Right.
Like I want to be able to be the pilot program for how we move this forward. So maybe your HR team hasn't yet been able to really adapt the way that they're recruiting to give you, a talent pool that represents, the population or the customers you serve. But I want you to bring it down to you as a leader when I get 3 candidates and they're kind of, any one of them would be fine because they're all so similar.
Yeah.
Am I asking, why isn't there diversity in my choices? Why do I only have like 40-year-old married white people? Like, if you happen to know they're married, it's like, how can I expand what that diversity is? Another thing I think is so actionable is for us to really look at our language. Our language fuels drama or diffuses drama. It's not just the point we're making that shows our blind side, it does. But just even the language that we, lead with, or the language we hear from others. I talk a lot about a great way to set a boundary is to, in active listening, repeat back almost what you wish the person had said and how they'd said it. So the example I use a lot is like, oh my gosh, this patient was dumped on me. And as a leader, I go, oh, we have a new intake, a new admission, continue. And I think it's so important to talk about the language of this because a lot of people, it's so much practice right now if you just listen to the news, but it's like, the biggest source of COVID in a community is, the migrants or, the people that are here from other countries. I'm like, okay. People who live in close proximity with not enough resources tend to have greater community spread of the disease. Like, I think we have to get good at we don't need to confront people or change their mindset. Right. But I think we do need to softly just continue to massage things back to a more neutral, less drama free zone. So even if we do that, it will increase our claims. To say, I think if we do it, it will definitely increase our conversations. It will increase our ability to address what should be claims. Like, I think we've got to be good at not just letting language that's discriminatory stand with our silence. I don't think we have to confront people, but I think part of being an upstander sometimes is just coming back in with more neutral language. I mean, it can be that simple.
Well, and it kind of calls people out on it because it makes you reflect, and you don't reflect if your mind is closed. So when you can just have a response back of, I think what you're meaning is this, I think it causes people to really reflect on, yeah, actually, that's what I meant. You're right. Yeah. I didn't say that right.
It gives them
yeah, you're right.
Yeah. But it definitely sets a boundary. I love that.
Yeah.
Because it leaves their dignity intact. The one thing I would warn, was it Kelsey?
Yes.
Kelsey, I would warn her is be careful when you get into reality-based leadership or when you become knowledgeable, one tiny step above somebody else. Okay, yeah. Not even above.
Right.
There's still all this you don't know. But when you get insight into something, one of the ways the ego morphs is we all know stop judging, start helping. But we do this weird thing where we start judging the judgers. So I'm like, well, now I realize that we have discrimination going on, but HR doesn't. And there's a little judgment in here. My company is taking baby steps or surface diversity. Right. I think we have to just say what is. My company has taken some initial steps in diversity, and for that, awesome. We wouldn't want a company who didn't.
Right.
And to let people off the hook, what you did, awesome, and here's what you could do next. And take the personalizing out of it. And I think that is so important that we don't get into judging the judgers.
Well, and I think that helps folks because that's what people are worried about. I'm worried about saying the wrong thing. Yeah. I want to help. I want to be proactive. These are difficult conversations to have. And so taking that judgment or putting people in a judgment-free zone of let's talk about the things we are doing right. We are taking movement. We are looking. There is some list in there of hey, at least the conversations are occurring in workplaces, and let's see what we can do to take them to the next level. And having a team of folks is so much better than poking holes at folks. Having folks that you've got a great foundation going here. I was just thinking if I could bring some ideas of things we could do to take this to the next level,
It's so
to
important.
really help our workplace. To have people where you put them on your team instead of against you
So
will always take you further.